Noah Pickus. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Minerva Project and a professor of social sciences at Minerva University. I've spent most of my previous career at a large private institution, but have also worked in large publics and small privates. And what I like most about these conversations, this is the third in a series of Inside Voices conversations, is the chance that I get to learn from talking to other learners, just the chance to actually talk about how we do what we do in higher education. There's a lot of conversations about content, and that's important. But I think for most of us in our day-to-day, it's as much about how we do what we do as what we're actually doing. And so these are conversations about institutional journeys, about the bumps along the road, about the triumphs that we should celebrate and the challenges that we all encounter. And we want to invite you into that conversation. You already see my guest, Willow Bay here, who is Dean of the Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism at USC. And as many of you already probably know, she has worn many hats over her career. She's had leadership roles in media, in journalism, in sports, and in academic leadership, although that last one being not entirely part of the plan, I think, as it until the last 10 years or less. But that's why I find it most fun, because Willow has private sector experience as well as academic experience. Willow, I saw that you were, I'll embarrass you to say you were named to LinkedIn's top 10 in voices in higher education, which was really wonderful to see. And I have gotten to know Willow and the work she's doing at USC as someone who sits at the intersection of thinking about communications and technology and journalism, and about the industries that those represent and connect to, and a deep passion for her students to both succeed in those industries and elsewhere, and also to lead all of those. And so without further ado, let's just jump in, Willow. First, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's certainly helpful for me, Willow, to start with, before we come to your academic experience. You have a lot of experience in media and journalism as well as academia, and you've thought a lot about the relationship between technology and content in those different sectors. Can you give us a little thumbnail of your background and your thinking about technology and how it intersects with areas like diversity that we'll be talking about?
Sure. So yes, I'm a bit of a surprise academic administrator. I grew up in the television news business, and was, interestingly enough, when I reflect back on my career, so I worked in sports news, business news, in networks and cable, but a lot of what I did was what we now call cross-platform. So working, for example, at CNN and bringing magazines online, or I shouldn't say online, we didn't say it then, onto the air, right? Creating news magazine shows in partnership with magazines. And it really had me thinking about the ways in which journalists, early on, before it was a thing, journalists really, their work should transcend the platform, to which they are initially assigned. Then I went to work for what back in the day would have been called a pure play, a media startup called the Huffington Post. And I worked there at the intersection of technology and content. But the truth of it is that Huffington Post in its inception was really a seamless combination of technology and content. The founders were inseparable in their roles, not siloed in their roles. So Arianna Huffington, Ken Lehrer, and Jonah Peretti, who of course, was a great tech visionary and also founder and leader of BuzzFeed. And the process that we use to develop content, to produce journalism, was an iterative content. Sometimes an idea would initiate with the journalists, the editors, and would be brought back into the tech team. And sometimes it would originate with the tech team and go back out to the journalists. And that truly integrated or circular nature of journalism and content really transformed the way I saw journalism, and certainly shaped my experience here at USC Annenberg.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that word integrated that you mentioned, Willow, because that description of what you experienced at HuffPost, things are changing in the academic world, but I think it's still fair to say that integrated and iterative, two words you use, are not really things that we excel at. We're still very much trained in, I have all this knowledge, I spent a lot of time gaining it, where would you like it, right? Can you say a little bit more about when you came into USC and into academic leadership, what that looked and felt like, and if that's changed a little bit in the time you've been working?
Yes and yes. It certainly has changed. When I got here, I called it a trip to Mars. But I also arrived at a time when Annenberg was it was a transformative moment for the school, because we had opened a new building with a state-of-the-art media center that was truly digital first, in a building with a soaring 4-story media wall situated with big windows on a corner of campus. So it was a very visual symbol of the breaking down of silos, visual and literal symbol of the breaking down of silos. We were at a crossroads of the university, and I came in and said, we're opening the doors, figuratively and literally, and using this as a gathering space, integrating the media wall in our public-facing programming, and making it very clear that we, the Annenberg community, should not be a siloed one. Similarly, in our media center, which is not just for journalists, it's open to journalists and all our communications disciplines. That was truly cross-platform, integrated current technologies and innovated and experimented with new ones. And yes, and lastly, yeah, it's interesting that you picked up on the iterative word, because I am an experimenter, and I've encouraged us to experiment, but I found really fertile ground here for doing that. At the same time, I think all of our institutions, and certainly academic institutions, are really recognizing that collaboration is where innovation happens, right? It's the ability to identify and amplify those intersections, right, which really allow us to do like creative and interesting things. And then finally, being in what is an inherently interdisciplinary field, communication, that also, I think, provides us with fertile ground for collaboration. And I'm sure if you speak to, other academic administrators on this Zoom today, they will say that they are seeing many of the same things in their own institutions. And then I would add one more piece. I think we all lived through the pandemic together, and that caused us to work much more collaboratively. And deans of schools got together on a weekly basis without the university, without our university partners, just to literally pool our resources, pool our wisdom, commiserate, and provide comfort and community. So I think there are so many forces going on right now that are really working to erode silos. That said, we still have a ways to go.
Yeah, and I'm mindful of, I feel, I don't know if others do, although I suspect they do, that we're all at this moment of, as things, I don't want to say get back to normal, because that doesn't seem possible, but as we are more in person on our campuses, how much will that iterative and collaborative experience continue? It's very easy to go back to the way things were. And that's a good, I think, way to say, sorry, go ahead, Willow.
I don't think that's going to happen. I'm really optimistic that, again, because the territory's been so fertile, and because institutional support systems are being built to support that kind of collaborative work. So I'm more optimistic than pessimistic.
Well, I love it. That's why you're a dean, because you got to get up every day. And I love that. But But let's go back to a more difficult time. I mean, we're here to talk about this managing complexity in diverse organizations course, and we'll get into that in a bit about what it does and the experience you had and how. But take us back to the context in which you decided it was important to create a new kind of DEIA course. Give us a sense of what the contextual issues were that led you to that.
Yeah, well, so I'm sure this is the case with many of our peer institutions and folks on the call today. You know, our school and our university has had a long-standing and significant commitment to issues of DEI. And Annenberg in particular was considered a leader in this space a decade or so ago.
Mhm.
We had been really aware of our need to refresh, reinvigorate some of the work, particularly in the training work that we were doing, and had started investigating other options. We worked with other programs before, and they felt not quite right for the time. They felt outdated. And then the summer of 2020 hit.
Mhm.
Right, when we were all focused on this extraordinary moment of racial reckoning, which accelerated our efforts within the school and certainly accelerated efforts and awareness in our industries of practice. And we were acutely and painfully aware of our own inadequacies as a school community for addressing these issues. If we were not already aware, students made us increasingly aware, right? As they were exceedingly vocal about the ways in which I think we were failing them as an institution.
Mhm.
And when then we looked beyond our school, we looked at an industry. So whether it's journalism, which has been a little more forward thinking in this space, far from perfect, but more forward thinking. And certainly when we looked at our kind of industries of practice in the communication space, so public relations, advertising, corporate comms, the lack of diversity in those areas is quite staggering in some cases, you know, particularly when you look at things like Black representation in the advertising industry or Black male representation in the advertising industry, it's minuscule.
Mhm.
So we were both looking right close to home, and we were looking outside into our industries of practice. Again, trying not to silo, right? Trying not to be in our silo,
Right.
but also trying to be very accountable for who we were right in our own neighborhood first, and realized that we needed to do much more to address the needs to right create environments that were truly inclusive, to lead and manage teams, to offer an open access to all the things that we know are so critical to this effort.
Mhm.
So that's when we started
Yeah,
looking around.
and I'm mindful that you were doing this, as you say, in the midst of the intersection both of the racial issues and COVID.
Right.
And so you have you don't have the normal mechanisms for people to connect with each other, which can be both positive and negative, but there's certainly a lot of positives to them. Before we talk about the journey, about the how this came about and what you've observed and learned from it, can you share a little bit just about the basics? Who is this course for? What kind of skills were you trying to get at? What did you want that was unique? You didn't want something off the shelf, which I think all of us have experienced as the reaction and the response that institutions often have. But that meant you were out there, you know, in the open sea. So what did you want to build here in terms of the basics that would make it unique?
I think we wanted to be, we felt an imperative to train first and foremost students that would leave here and really advance the needs of our industry. We wanted them to be able to go into newsrooms and really truly lead inclusive newsrooms, to create content that would resonate across, right, all sorts of communities. But we didn't want it to just stop with newsrooms. We recognized that our industries of practice were looking to this young generation who were much more sensitized to these issues, who cared deeply about racial and social justice issues, but still didn't have the skill set that,
Mhm.
right, would truly equip them to manage and lead in these spaces. So we wanted to be mindful of the industry context. We wanted to
Mm.
be mindful of our responsibility to improve the industry by developing best practices, but also to be supplying them with a talent population that had a grounding in increased awareness and, frankly, tools and skills that would allow all of us to flourish in these spaces.
Yeah, and the courses like this can be criticized often from two very different angles. One is that DEIA courses are overly ideological, that they're there to teach a certain specific way, and you can't disagree with that way. Or the opposite, that they're window dressing, that they're insufficiently meaningful in bringing about change. That's a skill in Charybdis that's difficult to navigate.
Yep, and
How
we've
did you
had
think
every
about
which
that?
one of these arguments, every which one of these ways, right, within our faculty as we, as we search for optimal solutions. I think the one of the things that we did here that was really helpful is we set up the Managing Complexity in Diverse Organizations course as a training program. So it's separate from our curriculum. It's now
Mhm.
required as of this September, August. It's required for our all of our non-journalism master's programs, or all of our professionally facing master's programs. Journalism has a different program because, again, I experimented in a couple different places, and so it is meant to be exceedingly skills based. It also took it in helpful ways, put it alongside and parallel to our curriculum, but it is meant for our curriculum to be able to layer upon and build upon the skills learned in the MCDO program. So it is not credit bearing. It is not in the curriculum as, right, one of the Annenberg required courses as part of your degree program, but it is a required training session, onboarding session for those programs. So that allowed us to really focus on skills building. It
Mhm.
allowed us to also, frankly, we opened the program up to alumni as well as our current students, particularly in the pilot stages, but we're going to continue to keep it open to our alumni because we believe so deeply in our commitment to our industries of practice. And frankly, there was so much interest from our alumni population, particularly our early career population, that we've decided to keep it open. But that it's not a credit bearing course allows people to move in and out of it much more fluidly.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to hear about that simultaneous launch of an arc of learning, right? It's not just for one group. It's you've got the graduate students, you've got the alumni. Can you say a little bit about just the basics? How many
Nuts and
students
bolts,
do you
yeah. So it's all online, obviously using Minerva's forum platform. We have trimmed it from 10 hours to 8 hours. So it is, or eight, I should say 8 sessions, 90-minute sessions. It has 4 units. And it is very action-based and skills-based as your forum program is designed, and your pedagogical approach within forum is designed to support skills-based training. So even when we think of the framing, it's lead, cultivate, communicate, and act, right? Those would be the headers for the four different
Mhm.
units. Very different than what you might read in a syllabus, right, for a 4-credit course. When you dig
Mhm.
deeper, it's incredibly rigorous and has clear academic foundations to it, but it is crisply paced, again, skills-based, highly interactive, highly engaging, and you experience it in a small, relatively small cohort, but a very mixed cohort. So it's across all 10 master's programs. So you get a very different sense of the student population. And then you have some early career professionals who are sitting there alongside you. So it's also a very interesting student population mix.
Yeah, and you've already highlighted one thing that, as you know, at Minerva Project, we believe in deeply, which is that these foundational skills are ones that need to be set at a foundation and then show up in other courses in other ways so that they are replicated, iterated, repeated in different ways. So it's not that you learn about bias mitigation and it's a training that you took for an hour asynchronously and then that's it. It's gone. But can you say a little bit as well? How did this partnership with Minerva Project develop? Well, you've said a few things about the technology, but give us a sense of how that happened.
So I was introduced to Sharon Singh and the team through the dean of our business school, Jeff Garrett, who's amazing. And we were part of a group of deans that was tasked with kind of exploring our future online. And Jeff Garrett said to me, I've got this really interesting company I want you to meet. So we had a great conversation and, was sort of brainstorming about ways to partner and thinking about, maybe, big, bold ideas like, okay, let's radically redo the undergraduate curriculum. Anybody who's in an academic setting knows that that's like not a mountain anybody was going to push a rock up in the middle of a pandemic, if ever. And so it became a sort of brainstorming, like how could we work with these folks? Then I literally had an aha moment as we are out there searching for very practically oriented programs that will help give our students a firm grounding in issues of equity, inclusion, and access. Here, I'm looking at a skills-based pedagogy in a really innovative online platform. Why don't we see if you all will work with us to develop a training program? And then it turned out that you had the foundations in your Managing Complexity course that really were able to kind of jumpstart the whole process for us. And I will tell you, there were a couple kind of critical steps in this process. And one, I think the most critical step was getting it off of removing the label of that this is a dean's project or a dean's pet project. So the first thing we did is he brought senior leaders, the leaders of my communication school and my journalism school, and then some of our master's programs directors in for a forum demo. And people were both interested and skeptical. And we all went through the demo and I was actually like shocked and thrilled because people loved it. So our very skilled academic administrators, longtime professors really found the technology platform really engaging and exciting. And that was a critical first step. The next step was, I think quickly, I mean, your title is Chief Academic Officer. I think your team quickly built a trust with us that there were, as fabulous as your tech platform is, so too is your academic leaders and your academic team. And James Genome was a perfect example of that. And he really, our team built a quick trust in your academic grounding and your understanding of pedagogy, your appreciation of our sense of our mission and our purpose. So it wasn't just a kind of a tech provider, it was really somebody who understood, our academic mission and how to support it. And I think once the team A got engaged technologically and B developed some trust that this was an enterprise based in true kind of pedagogical rigor, it allowed us to then move to the next stage of development. And it was clear our faculty did not want to hand off the design of a program to someone else. They really wanted to get involved. And we put together, frankly, a really highly regarded within the school team of faculty to work on curriculum development in partnership with the Minerva team. And we had two two staff members, a project manager and the head of our online programs, Tina Venegard and Neil Teixeira, who also helped us keep this project on track. So I think the combination of that strong administrative team keeping us on track, a really strong academic grounding, and then the Minerva partnership with both deep tech expertise and understanding and academic rigor kind of helped put a team together that allowed us to get here.
You've described Willow. So there's a technology, there's a new technology, there's a lot of focus on active learning pedagogy. There's a complex and difficult subject matter, and there's a need to integrate all these underlying skills, right? So it can't just be, give it to Professor X and she'll deliver her content. It really has to deliver these skills. And I guess I'd be thinking, that sounds great, and that sounds terrifying. That's that there's that people are used to working with partners where it's like, okay, you guys have a technology we like, or maybe they're used to working with someone who advises something about pedagogy, but putting all of these together is a lot, and I think we should. And as you said, I mean, I appreciate what you say about my team and which is full of academics. But you still have to manage. You have an outside party and a university working together on this. What are some of the challenges you encountered and any lessons you learned in navigating all that?
So I think just to put it in context, we are experimental and in nature. I mean, before I got here, this school was, and the university, frankly, was, more nimble and responsive than most. So, to be fair, we're situated in a fairly experimental culture, which made, amplified, right, by my being here. We also have a really strong online team, right, which we leaned heavily on, of course, during the pandemic. So I think our faculty really had a much deeper understanding of the capabilities of our tech team, right, our online tech team, and trusted them in ways that they might not have prior to being on Zoom for all that time, because they leaned on their expertise and were so well served, frankly, by them. We really had, we had a leg up on other schools because we had this really strong group. And so the ability to partner wasn't such a foreign one, I don't think. There were still hurdles when we went to the broader faculty. There were still hurdles of trust to get over. Who are these people? Are they taking over our curriculum? I never heard of them. Are they the same name as a company that's in some awful cybersecurity space? There were all sorts of conspiracy theories around who you were with the broader faculty, but with the group that was actually partnering on the development with you all, there was none of that. Only a lot of trust and, frankly, kind of a leaning into the experimentation and a leaning into the ability to be able to explore a new learning platform in this way.
And how, I mean, I'm always fascinated by how sometimes, when you can do anything and everything, particularly at a university, things spin out of control. But when you actually have drawn a circle where it's like, here's the challenge, here's what we need to do, but there's a lot of room to color inside the circle, then university faculty and staff can be incredibly creative. The constraints help rather than hurt in this case. Is that what you saw?
Completely. And I will say, I mean, this is where the Minerva team was incredibly helpful, because you had a roadmap, right? You had a clearly established roadmap with deliverables and deadlines. And that allowed our group to really stay on track and do what they're best at, right? Which is getting together and creating curriculum and designing content, for these modules. And, I will say in classic Annenberg form, it was 10 hours when we started. It was overstuffed. Right? That's sort of our way. I don't know how common that is to, other schools and institutions, but it's definitely our way, which is why the summer process was to trim it down to the 8 90-minute sessions,
Mhm.
to allow it to, right, distill it to its essence, but also to allow it to breathe a little bit. So
Yeah,
that's been part of the process.
yeah. And you talked about in the beginning, so here it is, it's the middle of the pandemic, it's the middle of a series of deep and searing conflicts over racial issues. The students are pressing you. Everyone's not on campus. All of us here, know that there's also generational changes that are happening. Um, what's your sense? We've been talking a lot about the faculty and the leadership engagement, but what do you think students, what are they reporting to you about this, good, bad, or indifferent?
So we did a pilot. We rolled out a pilot last year, and we did some surveys afterwards, and we were pretty shocked at how positive they were.
Hmm.
Right, the vast majority thought the learning outcomes were clear, that the sessions delivered on those learning outcomes, that they found it valuable, that it really expanded their skills in the space. And again, we were surprised at. We knew it was being fairly well received. We could tell that from being right within the Zoom rooms, or
Mhm.
sorry, the forum rooms. Um, but we were surprised at how high those self-reported satisfaction numbers were. We also opened it up. We did a session just for our faculty.
Mhm.
It was just a faculty session, so we were also able to get kind of parallel feedback from them. And to be honest, students liked it better than faculty liked it. So it
Mhm.
it really resonated well
Mhm.
with students, and I would include students, our um, early career professionals. But I say that my chief of staff took it, and she's a contemporary of mine, so clearly not early career. And she's still talking about how valuable it was for her.
It's fascinating to hear. One of the things we find at Minerva Project is it goes back to your point about skills. Having in so many areas, and this in particular, it's very easy to get caught up in the content. And the content is obviously very important, what you teach, but there can be lots of different kinds of content. The question is, how well do they get at these skills and provide a language
Hmm.
that a community can talk. A community can be a company, a corporation, it can be an industry, it can be a university, but provide some way of talking about issues, about diversity, about bias mitigation, about purpose or representation, that allows people to have a better, more analytically driven approach. Um, Now, I think you've done some thinking about expanding this to, you said at the beginning, talking about, um, you weren't just focused on students, but also on preparing them for the industry and media and journalism. And you've got a project going with a company now, I believe. Say a little bit more about this broader arc that you're beginning to explore.
Yeah. I mean, it also, no, thank you for referencing for the sort of the common language, right? And common core values and principles, because that was something that was really important to our faculty, both to ensure that we had this common language and grounding in our classrooms, and that we'd be sending that kind of common language and grounding out into the industry. So yeah, one of the things that we're thinking about with managing complexity in diverse organizations is offering it to our industry partners. We have a pilot this semester, actually, with an industry partner that we've provided a variety of training opportunities for over the years. And we shared with them the development of this project. They were really interested in it, and we are tweaking it to offer to them. So that's our first case. And we have somebody else also interested in working with us on this. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about this idea that we, going back to the very beginning, and let me say, I'm going to just say a sentence or two here and then draw all of you into this conversation. Um, that the way you talked about being more collaborative and iterative in your experience at HuffPost, and the way in which that continues, but it's a work in progress, certainly for those of us in academia. And part of it is creating programs that could be valuable for these different kinds of communities, alumni, staff, students, corporate partners, and that while there may be some differences, as to how they're applied and used, but particularly in an area like this, that it's actually tested and tried. And part of what excites me is that we can learn from that, because you get a feedback loop going from, well, what resonates with students and what resonates with those in industry. And so there's an opportunity as a learning institution to actually learn from this.